Hey guys, what happens when Obatala, commissioned by Olodumare to craft the world's land, gets drunk on the job? You're about to find out, because the Yoruba creation myth is basically a cosmic comedy of errors that makes your worst workday look like a masterpiece of efficiency. Obatala had one job, literally create the world, and he managed to mess it up so spectacularly that his younger brother had to step in and finish the project. In Yoruba belief, Obatala's drunken errors explain why some humans are born with disabilities, and he remains their protector. Tonight, we'll see how divine flaws shaped our world and discover how this cosmic disaster began with what seemed like a perfectly organized heavenly briefing. But before you get really comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you are enjoying what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you over there. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Picture the most exclusive boardroom in existence, the heavenly realm of Ọlọrun, where Olodumare, the supreme CEO of everything, has just announced the biggest project in cosmic history. The agenda is simple: create Earth. The execution? Well, that's where things get interesting. Olodumare remains aloof from direct worship, delegating tasks through Orishas, and he's decided this is definitely a job for delegation. You can practically hear the collective gulp from the divine middle management team as they realize they're about to become responsible for the biggest construction project ever attempted. Picture this divine briefing. Olodumare suddenly decides that world creation is a perfect group project. He's got a cosmic org chart that would make any corporation jealous, complete with 400 plus 1 Orishas. Yoruba tradition speaks of 400 plus 1 Orishas, symbolizing countless divine helpers, each with their own specialties, personalities, and let's be honest, their own potential for spectacular failure. The energy in the room is that special mixture of excitement and terror you get when your manager announces a team-building exercise that definitely won't be fun. But here's where things get really interesting. Olodumare hands out creation assignments like a professor distributing group projects, and we all know how well those usually go. There's always that one person who does all the work, someone who shows up drunk, and at least 3 people who completely disappear until the deadline. The divine delegation system is about to prove that even cosmic bureaucracy follows the same disastrous patterns as every workplace committee you've ever endured. Ọbatala gets the prime assignment: Chief Architect of Earth. He's basically been promoted to head of construction for the entire planet, which sounds impressive until you realize he's about to receive the most minimalist toolkit in construction history. Meanwhile, the other Orishas are getting their own cosmic departments, and you can see the political maneuvering happening in real time. As god of wisdom and prophecy, Ọ̀rúnmìlà records events and guides decisions through Ifa divination, basically becoming the universe's most important witness and advisor. His job is to watch everything happen and take notes, which is either the best assignment ever or the worst, depending on how much you enjoy watching your coworkers mess up from the sidelines. In Yoruba tradition, Eshu is the trickster messenger who ensures sacrifices reach gods and tests both divine and human resolve. Think celestial postal worker with attitude, except instead of delivering bills and junk mail, he's responsible for making sure prayers and sacrifices actually reach their intended recipients. The pressure is immense. One miscommunication could derail the entire creation process, and knowing Eshu's reputation as a trickster, this assignment is like giving the office prankster control of the company email system. The irony builds as this perfectly organized heavenly bureaucracy prepares to face its first major project management crisis. Olodumare has created a system with checks and balances, specialized roles, and clear chains of command. Everyone knows their job, everyone has their assignments, and everyone is theoretically qualified for their position. It's the kind of organizational structure that business schools would use as a case study in effective leadership and resource allocation. What makes this creation myth brilliant is how it turns cosmic genesis into a relatable workplace comedy, where even gods need backup plans. The supreme being delegates responsibility, middle management gets nervous about deliverables, and the specialized workforce tries to figure out how to execute an impossible project with limited resources and unclear specifications. It's every corporate restructuring you've ever lived through, except the stakes are the entire universe, and the team meeting is happening in heaven. And trust me, they're going to need those backup plans more than they realize, because divine competence is about to meet palm wine, and that combination has never ended well in the history of any workplace, cosmic or otherwise. But first, Ọbatala needs to collect his equipment for this monumental task, and what he's about to receive will make every construction worker in history question their career choices. Olodumare hands him a snail shell filled with loose earth, a 5-toed hen, a pigeon, and a golden chain. That's it. That's the entire equipment list for creating continents. Try explaining to a modern engineer that you're going to create continents using poultry and a mollusk shell, and watch their soul leave their body in real time. You'd get the same look if you told a surgeon they were performing heart surgery with a spoon and a rubber chicken. The contrast between the magnitude of the task and the apparent simplicity of the tools is so jarring that it makes IKEA instructions look like sophisticated engineering manuals. At least IKEA gives you more than one type of screw and a cartoon illustration of a confused Swedish person. The golden chain serves as the ultimate cosmic elevator, lowering Obatala from heaven to the primordial waters below. The other gods contributed their gold to create this celestial lifeline, making it the most expensive rope in existence. There's no safety harness, no backup plan, and definitely no cosmic OSHA inspector checking the weight limits. You're looking at a construction project that would make modern safety coordinators break out in hives and immediately update their insurance policies. Each tool carries deep symbolic meaning that would make a philosophy professor weep with both joy and frustration. The 5-toed hen represents active creation through scratching, which sounds profound until you realize you're essentially saying that continental drift was accomplished by a divine chicken having the most productive day of its life. The pigeon symbolizes gentle harmony, which is nice, but it's still a bird whose primary qualification is presumably not pooping on the creation project. The symbolism is beautiful, but the practicality is about as sound as using a goldfish to perform brain surgery. The snail shell isn't just a container, it's the entire raw material budget for planet Earth. This makes it the most cost-effective construction project ever attempted, assuming you measure success by materials used, rather than actually completing the job without divine intervention. The shell contains sand that will become all dry land, which means the entire physical foundation of human civilization fits in something you could probably use as a soup bowl. Talk about efficient resource management. The 5-toed hen becomes the ultimate earth-moving equipment, literally scratching continents into existence with the enthusiasm of a chicken finding fresh dirt after a long winter. This bird is about to accomplish what modern machinery struggles to do on a much smaller scale, armed with nothing but natural chicken instincts and presumably a very strong work ethic. The image of continental formation happening because a hen got really excited about scratching is simultaneously absurd and oddly endearing. Picture this divine construction site. No hard hats, no permits, no environmental impact studies, just a god with farm animals and a shell, about to terraform reality itself. The health and safety violations alone would shut down any modern construction project faster than you can say, divine lawsuit. Yet somehow, this seemingly chaotic approach is about to create the foundational structure for all human civilization. The genius of this toolkit reveals itself as each seemingly simple item becomes a sophisticated instrument of cosmic engineering, proving that sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that look completely insane to outside observers. But even the most perfect tools require focused execution, and Ọbatala is about to discover that cosmic construction demands the same professional discipline as any earthly project. Unfortunately, that professional discipline is about to encounter palm wine, and the combination has never ended well in the history of any workplace, cosmic or otherwise. You're about to witness the most consequential workplace accident in history, and it all starts with what seems like an innocent drink break. Ọbatala descends on his golden chain, construction toolkit in hand, ready to execute the perfect creation plan with the focused precision of a divine architect. The primordial waters stretch endlessly below him, waiting to be transformed into continents and civilizations. Everything is going according to plan until he encounters palm wine, which is essentially the ancient equivalent of finding an open bar at a work conference when you're already stressed about a massive deadline. Here's where our cosmic architect makes a decision that would make every project manager in history scream into a pillow. He decides to sample the local refreshments mid-project. Not a quick sip to calm his nerves, mind you, but a full-blown tasting session that suggests he's either never encountered alcohol before or has seriously underestimated its effects on divine physiology. The palm wine is just sitting there, fermented and ready, like the universe's worst possible timing for a happy hour invitation. The palm wine hits different when you're a god on a deadline. One moment Ọbatala is carefully measuring out his sacred sand and positioning his earth-moving poultry. The next he's viewing the entire creation project through the hazy lens of divine intoxication. Suddenly, the most important construction project in existence becomes a case study in cosmic procrastination, as if the universe's lead contractor decided that geology could wait while he explored the local beverage culture. Ọbatala doesn't just get tipsy. He achieves legendary levels of intoxication that would impress college freshmen and horrify his cosmic supervisors. We're talking about the kind of drunk where you think you're still perfectly capable of performing delicate tasks, while everyone watching can clearly see you're about to make decisions that will be discussed in therapy for generations. The god of purity and wisdom has essentially become the poster child for why construction sites have strict policies about alcohol consumption. While completely hammered, Ọbatala attempts to create human beings. This is where the creation myth takes a turn that makes you wonder if there should be divine breathalyzer tests before major cosmic assignments. Working with clay while severely impaired, he fashions humans with disabilities and imperfections, turning what should have been precise divine craftsmanship into a cautionary tale about working under the influence. The humans he creates during this intoxicated crafting session aren't mistakes in the traditional sense, but they bear the permanent mark of their creator's compromised judgment. The irony is devastating. The god of purity and wisdom becomes the poster child for why you shouldn't drink and create, establishing the first cosmic safety violation in recorded divine history. It's like watching the most responsible employee in the company get caught photocopying their face at the office Christmas party, except the consequences affect the entire human race. Ọbatala's palm wine incident becomes a permanent teaching moment, establishing the first divine prohibition that his followers observe to this day. His devotees still abstain from palm wine as a reminder of this cosmic lesson in the importance of maintaining focus and purity during important tasks. It's a divine policy change that emerged directly from workplace misconduct. But cosmic deadlines wait for no god, drunk or sober, and someone needs to finish building the world before Olodumare starts asking uncomfortable questions about project timelines. Enter Oduduwa, the younger brother who proves that sometimes the most responsible person in the room is the one nobody expected to save the day. He arrives at the cosmic construction site to find his older brother passed out on the job and Earth half-finished, like discovering your roommate unconscious next to a half-assembled bookshelf with mysterious stains on the instruction manual. The scene is exactly what you'd expect from a workplace disaster. Tools scattered everywhere, the project timeline completely blown, and the person responsible for everything currently drooling into the primordial sand. The pressure is immense. The supreme boss is expecting a completed planet. The cosmic deadline is looming, and the original architect is sleeping off the worst hangover in divine history. You can practically hear the cosmic clock ticking as Oduduwa surveys the damage and realizes that someone needs to step up before this becomes the kind of project failure that gets discussed in heavenly performance reviews for eternity. The half-formed landmasses are sitting there like abandoned construction sites, waiting for someone to actually finish what was started. Oduduwa doesn't panic, doesn't call a meeting, doesn't form a committee. He simply picks up the tools and gets to work, embodying every competent coworker who's ever covered for their irresponsible colleague without making a big show of it. There's no dramatic speech about responsibility or cosmic duty, just the quiet competence of someone who understands that complaining about the situation won't make the continents form themselves. He takes the remaining sand from the divine pouch and gets back to the business of world creation. The hen and pigeon, probably confused by the management change, continue their earth-spreading duties with professional dedication that puts most human employees to shame. These birds have apparently mastered the art of adapting to new leadership without missing a beat, scratching and scattering with the same methodical precision they showed under Ọbatala's supervision. It's like watching a construction crew seamlessly transition between foremen while maintaining their productivity standards. Under Oduduwa's sober supervision, the continents expand properly, the landmasses settle correctly, and Earth finally starts looking like a habitable planet instead of a divine art project gone wrong. The difference between drunk construction management and sober construction management becomes immediately apparent as geographic features begin forming with actual structural integrity. Rivers flow where they should, mountains rise at reasonable angles, and the whole planet starts showing signs of long-term planning rather than impulsive creativity. This intervention becomes the template for Yoruba leadership philosophy. Authority isn't about being first. It's about being effective when it matters most. Oduduwa's takeover of the creation project establishes a precedent that competence trumps seniority, and that divine power comes with the responsibility to use it wisely. The cosmic org chart gets permanently reorganized after this incident, with Oduduwa becoming ruler of the physical earth and Ọbatala getting reassigned to human creation with strict sobriety requirements. What could have been a cosmic disaster becomes a lesson in divine teamwork and the importance of having reliable backup systems, setting the stage for an organizational restructuring that would make management consultants weep with envy. The result is a divine government system that actually functions, proving that sometimes the most effective organizational structures emerge from spectacular workplace disasters. After the palm wine incident, Olodumare sits in his heavenly office, probably staring at incident reports and wondering how his perfectly planned creation project turned into a divine HR nightmare. The Supreme CEO realizes he needs to implement what can only be described as the most effective damage control in cosmic history, turning crisis into opportunity with the efficiency of a management consultant who actually knows what they're doing. The challenge is massive. How do you manage a universe-spanning operation with gods who have proven they can be distracted by alcohol and need constant supervision? It's like trying to run a multinational corporation where your department heads might wander off to sample the local beverages during critical product launches. Olodumare's solution involves creating the kind of specialized bureaucracy that would make modern management consultants weep with envy, complete with clear job descriptions, accountability measures, and presumably a very strict alcohol policy. Orunmila emerges as the cosmic record keeper and wisdom department, having witnessed the entire creation process and now serving as the ultimate institutional memory. As Olodumare's first son, he becomes the divine equivalent of that one employee who's been with the company since day one and actually remembers why certain policies exist. His job involves keeping track of everything that happens, providing guidance to other gods, and presumably making sure someone writes down the important stuff so future divine employees don't have to learn everything through trial and error. Eshu gets promoted to divine messenger service and cosmic quality control, ensuring that communication between realms actually happens and sacrifices reach their intended recipients. This is basically the universe's most important postal service, except instead of delivering bills and junk mail, Eshu handles prayers, offerings, and interdimensional correspondence. His role as cosmic mediator means he's constantly testing the wisdom of humans and maintaining balance between the divine and mortal realms, which sounds like the kind of job that requires excellent organizational skills and infinite patience. The Ifa divination system develops as the ultimate customer service department, allowing humans to access divine guidance through trained professionals called babalawos. These specialists use complex divination procedures involving palm nuts, cowrie shells, and divination chains to connect with Orunmila's wisdom, creating a direct customer service line to cosmic knowledge. It's like having a help desk that actually provides useful answers instead of telling you to restart your computer and hope for the best. Each Orisha gets assigned specific domains and responsibilities, creating a specialized divine workforce that operates like the world's most efficient corporate structure. Ọbatala gets reassigned to human creation with strict sobriety requirements, while Ogun handles metalworking and warfare, and other gods manage their own departments with clear performance metrics. This division of labor ensures that all aspects of the cosmos are managed effectively, preventing future crises and allowing each Orisha to focus on their area of expertise without getting distracted by other people's responsibilities. The genius of this system is that it acknowledges divine limitations while creating redundancies and checks that prevent future palm wine incidents. Instead of pretending that gods are infallible, the structure assumes they'll make mistakes and builds in safeguards accordingly. It's a remarkably modern approach to risk management, creating multiple layers of oversight and specialized roles that ensure the universe keeps functioning even when individual gods have off days. What started as a creation, disaster becomes the blueprint for Yoruba social organization, establishing principles that would influence human governance for millennia. The humans created during this divine reorganization inherit a world shaped by both divine ambition and divine mistakes, complete with a customer service system that actually works, and gods who've learned that even cosmic power requires good management and the occasional reality check. The divine bureaucracy restructuring reveals timeless lessons about responsibility, teamwork, and the critical importance of having backup plans, even for cosmic projects. This isn't just an ancient story about divine beings throwing clay around in heaven. It's a practical manual for understanding how effective organizations respond when their star employee makes a spectacular error, wrapped in a narrative that makes the gods feel like your slightly dysfunctional extended family. The palm wine prohibition that Obatala's followers still observe today serves as a permanent reminder that even divine beings must learn from their mistakes and establish protective boundaries. Thousands of years later, his devotees still refuse palm wine during religious ceremonies, turning a moment of cosmic embarrassment into a lasting lesson about maintaining focus during important tasks. It's like having a company policy that emerged from that one time someone showed up drunk to the board meeting and accidentally approved the wrong merger. The myth's genius lies in how it addresses the fundamental question of why bad things happen to good people. Sometimes it's because the gods were having an off day, which is either the most comforting or most terrifying explanation, depending on your perspective. The creation of humans with disabilities during Ọbatala's intoxicated crafting session isn't treated as a cosmic accident to be ashamed of, but as a profound statement about divine accountability and the sacred nature of all human conditions. The god doesn't try to hide his mistake or pretend it didn't happen. He owns it, learns from it, and his followers honor it. Modern project managers could learn from this divine case study. Always have backup personnel, never work under the influence, and remember that delegation doesn't mean abdication of responsibility. The myth essentially provides a masterclass in crisis management, showing how effective organizations adapt when individual members struggle while maintaining focus on the ultimate goal. This creation story establishes that imperfection isn't a bug in the cosmic system. It's a feature that reminds us of the importance of consciousness, care, and community support. The humans created during Ọbatala's compromised state become a permanent part of the divine plan, requiring the development of social structures that can care for everyone regardless of their physical or mental differences. It's a creation story that builds disability rights into the fundamental structure of the universe. The collaborative creation process involving multiple Orishas demonstrates that the biggest projects require diverse skills, specialized knowledge, and the wisdom to know when to ask for help. The myth doesn't celebrate individual genius or divine perfection. Instead, it shows how effective teams redistribute responsibilities and cover for each other's weaknesses when unexpected challenges arise. What makes this creation story endure is how it presents gods as powerful yet flawed beings who must learn, grow, and work together, just like us. They face deadlines, make poor decisions under pressure, deal with workplace conflicts, and struggle to balance competing priorities. The divine realm operates like the world's most important office, complete with management restructuring, policy changes, and lessons learned from spectacular failures. Perhaps that's what makes this cosmic comedy of errors so universally appealing. A universe built by beings who make mistakes, learn from them, and keep trying to do better, making every workplace disaster feel a little more manageable and a lot more divine. This cosmic workplace comedy reveals why the Yoruba creation myth has endured across continents and centuries, continuing to shape religious practices from Santeria to Candomblé in the African diaspora. Tonight, you've discovered that the most human thing about the gods isn't their power. It's their ability to mess up spectacularly and still create something beautiful. The next time you're facing a deadline with incomplete tools and questionable supervision, remember that even the creation of Earth required a backup plan and a designated driver. Sweet dreams, and may your own projects be blessed with better planning than the cosmic construction of reality itself. You probably think war gods are supposed to be bloodthirsty berserkers, right? All rage and glory and dramatically swinging axes? Well, meet Tyr, the Norse god of war, who became famous not for winning battles, but for deliberately feeding his hand to a giant wolf. And the really uncomfortable part? He knew exactly what was going to happen. The Voluspa warned that Fenrir would swallow the sun itself if left unbound, so this wasn't some heroic last stand or glorious sacrifice. This was divine necessity at its most brutal. Tonight, we're stepping into the story of how even gods sometimes have to make terrible decisions for the greater good. But first, we need to understand exactly what kind of war god would even consider such a thing. Tyr's defining characteristic wasn't bloodlust or battle fury. It was his role as the divine guarantor of justice and oath-keeping. You'd think he would be out there collecting skulls and inspiring berserkers, but instead, he spent most of his time making sure contracts were properly witnessed and oaths genuinely binding. Picture this. While Thor was off smashing things with his hammer and Odin was collecting dead warriors like they were trading cards, Tyr was stuck in the divine equivalent of a courthouse, mediating disputes and ensuring everyone's sworn word actually meant something. He was the Norse pantheon's most reluctant war god. The irony runs deeper than you think. Tyr's name literally translates to God. Not god of war or god of justice, just God. The ancient Norse looked at this guy and thought, you know what? This one's so fundamentally important, we're just going to call him God and leave it at that. According to the Prose Edda, his role as the ultimate guarantor of treaties and oaths earned him this title. It's the divine equivalent of being so iconic you only need one name, except instead of being Madonna, you're the cosmic notary who makes sure everyone's promises actually stick. Your business card just says, God. And somehow, everyone knows exactly what you do. The Romans completely missed the point when they tried to identify Tyr with Mars through their Interpretatio Romana. They saw war god and immediately thought, oh, this must be the guy who loves violence and conquest. But Tyr wasn't Mars. He was more like the divine combination of a Supreme Court justice and a contract guarantor who happened to have war in his portfolio. While Mars was busy inspiring armies to glory, Tyr was making sure the peace treaties afterward were legally binding, and the oaths sworn were unbreakable. You can imagine the Romans' confusion when they realized their new war god spent more time formalizing agreements than reading battlefield tactics. Other gods came to Tyr when they needed someone absolutely trustworthy, which sounds like a compliment until you realize it's actually the most dangerous reputation you can have in a pantheon full of tricksters and oath-breakers. When Thor needed a witness for an important agreement, he went to Tyr. When Odin required someone to guarantee a binding contract, he went to Tyr. Even Loki, master of loopholes and technicalities, respected Tyr's word, which should have been everyone's first warning that something was seriously wrong with this arrangement. You see, being the reliable one in a family of gods is like being the designated driver in a group of friends who think public intoxication is an art form. Sure, everyone appreciates you, but you're also the one who ends up holding the bag when things go catastrophically wrong. While the other gods were off having adventures and making questionable decisions, Tyr was building a reputation for absolute integrity that would eventually trap him in the most uncomfortable divine workplace situation imaginable. The problem with being known as the god who always keeps his word is that eventually someone will test that reputation in the worst possible way. Tyr's honor wasn't just his defining characteristic, it was his liability. Every oath he witnessed, every contract he validated, every promise he guaranteed built toward a moment when his integrity would be weaponized against him. He'd spent centuries being the god you could trust, never realizing that trust would become a chain stronger than any metal. This reputation for unwavering honor made Tyr the only god capable of the ultimate sacrifice, not because he was the bravest or the strongest, but because he was the only one whose word was genuinely unbreakable. The other gods might make promises they could rationalize breaking later, but Tyr's commitments were carved in cosmic stone. Which brings us to the moment when this reputation would be tested by the most unlikely catalyst imaginable. A family gathering that went spectacularly wrong. Loki shows up to a family gathering with what looks like an oversized wolf puppy, and somehow this becomes everyone's worst nightmare. You're sitting there at the divine dinner table, and your weird uncle walks in with this adorable creature that's basically a German shepherd crossed with a small horse. Everyone's thinking, "Oh, how cute. Loki brought a pet." What they should have been thinking was, "Oh no, Loki brought the apocalypse with house training issues." Fenrir was Loki's son, along with his siblings Jormungandr, the world serpent, and Hel, goddess of the dead. As recorded in Gylfaginning, chapter 34, it sounds like the setup for a really dark fairy tale, and Loki's parenting strategy seemed to involve collecting every mythological creature that would eventually cause maximum property damage. But initially, Fenrir seemed harmless enough. He was just a wolf cub who happened to eat slightly more than your average pet. The gods looked at this situation and thought, well, at least it's not another eight-legged horse. Their standards for normal had clearly been compromised by years of Loki's creative contributions to the family tree. The prophecy about these children bringing disaster to the gods was the kind of cosmic spoiler alert that nobody wanted to hear. The poetic Edda's Vafthrûthanismal had specifically warned of the sun's devourer, and here was that very creature playing fetch in their backyard. It was like getting a fortune cookie that reads, "Your adorable houseguest will eventually devour the sun." The gods had two choices: take the prophecy seriously and deal with the problem, or ignore it and hope things worked out differently. Naturally, they chose option 3, panic quietly while pretending everything was fine. This is the divine equivalent of seeing your check engine light and deciding to just turn up the radio louder. The gods' initial attempts to handle the Fenrir situation diplomatically were about as effective as trying to negotiate with a toddler who's discovered permanent markers. They tried reasoning with him, setting boundaries, and establishing feeding schedules. You can imagine the meetings. "So, Fenrir, we've noticed you're eating our furniture. Can we talk about portion control?" Meanwhile, Fenrir was growing larger and stronger every day, transforming from an oversized puppy into something that made regular wolves look inadequate by comparison. The eating situation became particularly problematic when Fenrir started consuming everything in sight. We're talking about a creature whose appetite made competitive eating champions look like they were on a diet. The gods watched their food stores disappear faster than snacks at a college study session. They'd stock up on provisions for a month, and Fenrir would clear it out by Tuesday. The divine cafeteria staff were probably having nightmares about their grocery bills. The mounting panic was the kind of slow-burn anxiety that builds when you realize you're raising your own destroyer. It's like adopting a cute little plant that turns out to be kudzu with territorial ambitions. The gods kept looking at Fenrir, then at each other, then back at Fenrir, waiting for someone to say what everyone was thinking. This was a terrible idea. But nobody wanted to be the one to suggest that maybe, just maybe, they should have read the fine print on that prophecy. The bureaucratic nightmare of trying to decide what to do with a rapidly growing apocalypse wolf was exactly the kind of administrative crisis that made even immortal beings consider early retirement. You've got committee meetings about committee meetings, subcommittees to form subcommittees, and everyone hoping someone else would volunteer for the thankless job of wolf management. The gods' dawning realization that conventional solutions wouldn't work hit them like a divine slap to the face. Normal chains wouldn't hold something that was growing stronger by the day. Regular diplomacy was useless against a creature whose idea of negotiation was eating the negotiation table. They needed something completely different, something that would require the kind of desperate creativity that only comes from complete terror. What happened next would make their previous administrative failures look like masterpieces of competent planning. The gods' first attempt at solving the Fenrir problem involved the kind of overconfident engineering that comes from never having met a problem they couldn't solve with bigger hammers. They forged lighting, a massive chain with links thick enough to anchor a warship, and presented it to Fenrir with the casual confidence of professionals who'd clearly never dealt with anything outside their expertise. The committee meeting probably went something like this. Right. So we've got this wolf situation. Anyone have suggestions? Have we tried chains? Brilliant. Make them really strong. This was their entire strategy. More metal, bigger links, problem solved. Fenrir's reaction to lading was the kind of casual dismissal that makes you question everything you thought you knew about physics. According to the Prose Edda, he simply kicked, and the chains snapped like they were made of wishful thinking and divine overconfidence. The gods watched their masterpiece of metallurgy crumble under what amounted to a gentle stretch, followed by the awkward silence of professionals realizing their expertise meant absolutely nothing. But here's where the gods demonstrated that truly spectacular failure requires commitment. Instead of reconsidering their approach, they doubled down with Dromi, convinced that the problem was simply insufficient chain thickness. This was the mythological equivalent of trying to open a pickle jar by applying the same technique but with more enthusiasm. They went back to the drawing board, made chains twice as thick, twice as strong, and twice as expensive, because surely the issue was just inadequate metallurgy. Fenrir's growing amusement at these pathetic attempts became the most uncomfortable part of the whole situation. He wasn't just breaking their chains, he was enjoying it. You could see him thinking, "Oh, they're trying again. How charming." He'd let them put Dromi on, wait for their hopeful expressions, then casually flex and watch their faces fall as the metal gave way. It was like watching someone repeatedly try to impress you with magic tricks they learned from a cereal box. Each failed binding made Fenrir stronger and the gods more terrified, exactly as Gylfaginning describes a perfect cycle of cause and effect that turned their solution into their worst nightmare. Every broken chain was a lesson in divine incompetence, and Fenrir was clearly taking notes. The gods were inadvertently training him to recognize their attempts at containment, which is roughly equivalent to teaching a burglar about your security system by demonstrating exactly how it fails. The mounting desperation was palpable as the gods realized they were dealing with something beyond conventional solutions. This wasn't a problem you could solve with better engineering or stronger materials. This was a creature that existed outside their normal understanding of how things worked. Their chains weren't just breaking, they were being casually dismissed by something that found their best efforts genuinely amusing. The panic that set in was the kind of institutional terror that comes from facing your own incompetence in high definition. They'd tried everything they knew how to do, and it hadn't just failed. It had failed spectacularly, publicly, and repeatedly. Their solution, had actually made the problem worse by alerting Fenrir to their intentions and demonstrating their complete inability to back up their threats. The gods' realization that they needed something completely different, something that looked utterly harmless but worked in ways that defied every natural law, would lead them down a path that made their previous failures look like minor administrative hiccups. Their solution came in the form of Gleipnir, a binding that looked like it couldn't restrain a particularly energetic house cat. This wasn't some intimidating chain forged from mystical metals. It was a silky ribbon that appeared about as threatening as a bookmark. The gods held this delicate strand and tried to convince themselves it would succeed where massive iron links had failed. It was like replacing a tank with a strongly worded letter and hoping for the best. The dark magic woven into this deceptively delicate binding was the kind of cosmic cheating that makes physicists weep. Gleipnir wasn't just a rope, it was a philosophical argument made manifest, a binding that worked because it shouldn't exist. The dwarves had somehow crafted something that operated on principles that made natural law throw up its hands and walk away. This wasn't engineering. It was reality having a nervous breakdown. The impossible ingredients that went into making Gleipnir work read like a shopping list written by someone having a fever dream. The sound of a cat's footfall, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, and the spittle of a bird. According to Skaldskaparmal, these ingredients cannot be found in the world today because the dwarves used them all up creating Gleipnir. They had essentially weaponized absence, turning the concept of nothing into the strongest something imaginable. The dwarves forged Gleipnir in Svartalfheim to bind the wolf until Ragnarok, cheating so thoroughly that physics gave up trying to understand it. They took impossibilities and braided them together into something that defied every natural law. This wasn't metallurgy. It was applied philosophy with a minor in making reality very uncomfortable. The finished product looked harmless because it was made entirely of things that weren't supposed to be there. Something so thin could hold what massive chains couldn't because it wasn't operating in the same conceptual space as regular restraints. Physical chains work through physical resistance, but Gleipnir worked through existential confusion. It was like trying to break free from a logical paradox. The harder you struggled, the more entangled you became in the fundamental wrongness of your situation. Fenrir's strength was legendary, but even legendary strength has trouble grappling with things that technically don't exist. The gods' mixture of hope and terror, as they held their last resort, was the emotional equivalent of holding a live grenade while hoping it would solve your problems. They knew this was their final gambit. If Gleipnir failed, they'd officially run out of solutions and would have to start updating their resumes. But they also knew that if it worked, they'd have to live with the knowledge that they'd solved their problem through cosmic fraud. The obvious problem stared them in the face like an uncomfortable truth at a family reunion. Why would Fenrir ever agree to be bound by what looked like decorative thread? He wasn't stupid, and he'd already demonstrated his ability to casually destroy their previous attempts. They needed a sales pitch that would make this obviously magical binding seem like anything other than what it obviously was. The gods presented Gleipnir as harmless, suggesting it might be fun to see if Fenrir could break their delicate thread. They gathered around with expressions that screamed, "We're definitely not up to something suspicious," while holding what was obviously the most suspicious thing in the 9 realms. Their casual confidence was like watching someone try to sell a timeshare to their own executioner. Fenrir's immediate suspicion about this obviously magical binding was the kind of skepticism that comes from having a functioning brain. He looked at Gleipnir the way you might look at a contract written entirely in fine print by someone who keeps giggling nervously. This wasn't just a ribbon. It hummed with the kind of wrongness that makes reality uncomfortable. Fenrir had broken massive chains without effort, so why were the gods suddenly interested in his opinion about craft supplies? The awkward back and forth as the gods tried to sound casual about their trap was like watching a really bad improv group try to sell a story nobody believed. "Oh, this old thing? It's just a test of strength. Very casual. Nothing binding about it. Well, I mean, obviously it's binding, but not in a permanent way, unless you can't break it. Which you definitely can, probably, we assume. Fenrir's devastating counteroffer hit the gods like a divine slap to the face. According to the Prose Edda, Fenrir only agreed when Tyr placed his hand in his mouth as a gesture of good faith. This wasn't just calling their bluff. It was raising the stakes to a level that made everyone profoundly uncomfortable. Fenrir had turned their clever trap into a test of divine courage, and suddenly, nobody was feeling particularly clever. The gods' horror, as they realized what Fenrir was really asking for, was the kind of dawning terror that comes from understanding you've been outmaneuvered by someone you underestimated. He wasn't just asking for a hand in his mouth. He was asking for proof that they genuinely believed their own story about harmless testing. If this was really just a game, surely they wouldn't mind offering a small gesture of trust. The uncomfortable silence, as every god suddenly found somewhere else to look, was like watching a group of friends decide who has to ask the waiter about the suspicious smell coming from the kitchen. Thor examined his hammer with newfound interest. Odin developed a sudden fascination with the clouds. Even Loki, who usually thrived on uncomfortable situations, seemed to have pressing business elsewhere. All eyes turned to Tyr, the one god they knew wouldn't back down from a promise. This wasn't because he was the bravest or the strongest. It was because he was the only one whose reputation was built on keeping his word no matter what. The other gods looked at him with the kind of desperate hope usually reserved for finding your keys right before you're catastrophically late. Fenrir's demand had turned their clever trap into a test of divine courage, and everyone knew there was only one god who would pass that test. What happened next would demonstrate exactly what divine responsibility looked like when stripped of all its glamorous pretenses. Tyr stepped forward with the kind of grim determination you see in someone who's already calculated the cost and decided it's worth paying. This wasn't heroic bravado or divine confidence. This was a god doing math with his own body parts, and arriving at an answer he didn't like, but couldn't argue with. The moment stretched like taffy as Tyr approached Fenrir, his expression carrying the resigned professionalism of someone about to perform the world's most uncomfortable workplace task. The other gods watched with quiet fascination, their awe at Tyr's stoic acceptance mixing with the uncomfortable knowledge that they were witnessing something simultaneously heroic and deeply stupid. Tyr's face showed no dramatic emotion, no stirring speeches about sacrifice and honor. He looked like a man who'd read the contract thoroughly and was now fulfilling the terms, even though the terms were terrible. The binding process began with Fenrir allowing the gods to wrap Gleipnir around him, treating it like an amusing game. The silky ribbon looked absurd against his massive frame, like trying to gift wrap a thunderstorm. Fenrir flexed experimentally, expecting the familiar satisfaction of watching divine engineering fail spectacularly. Instead, he discovered that struggling against Gleipnir was like trying to argue with a logical paradox. The harder he pulled, the more entangled he became in something that shouldn't exist. Fenrir's growing realization that he couldn't break free was the kind of dawning horror that comes from discovering you've been outmaneuvered by people you thought were idiots. The casual amusement drained from his expression as he tested the binding again and again, each attempt meeting with the same impossible resistance. The gods had finally managed to create something that worked, and Fenrir was experiencing the cosmic equivalent of being beaten at chess by someone you'd assumed couldn't tie their own shoes. The terrible moment when Fenrir understood he'd been tricked hit him like a divine slap to the face. This wasn't a test of strength, it was a trap, and he'd walked into it because he trusted their word. The betrayal was complete, and Fenrir's expression shifted from confusion to fury, to something much more calculating. He'd been played, and someone was going to pay for it. His eyes fixed on Tyr's hand, still resting trustingly in his mouth. The instant when Fenrir's jaws snapped shut was the kind of moment that makes time hiccup. There was no dramatic build-up, no final words. Just the swift, decisive crunch of divine justice being served at body temperature. Tyr's right hand disappeared at the wrist with the efficiency of a bureaucratic stamp, leaving behind a stump that would forever remind everyone of the price of cosmic necessity. Fenrir's saliva formed the river Van as it flowed from his mouth, according to the Prose Edda, creating a permanent reminder of this moment carved into the landscape itself. Tyr's stoic acceptance of his sacrifice was perhaps the most unsettling part of the entire ordeal. He didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't even look particularly surprised. He simply stepped back, cradling his new disability with the same professional calm he'd brought to the negotiation. This act of brutal necessity had saved the gods from immediate destruction, but it also revealed something deeply uncomfortable about the nature of divine responsibility. Tyr had traded his hand for the continued existence of the cosmos, and everyone involved felt like they needed a very long bath. The gods were safe, Fenrir was bound, and the price had been paid in the most unglamorous currency imaginable. Tyr's story strips away every romantic notion we have about heroism and reveals something far more uncomfortable, that real courage often looks like bureaucratic necessity rather than glorious battle. This wasn't about honor or glory. It was about someone doing the job nobody else wanted because someone had to do it. The Norse understood something we've forgotten. Sometimes saving the world requires making choices that leave everyone feeling dirty. The brutal absurdity of divine responsibility becomes clear when you realize that even gods end up sacrificing everything for problems they helped create. Picture this. You're a young traveler in ancient Greece, and you've just met the most stunning woman at a crossroads. She's got everything: beauty, charm, that mysterious allure that makes your heart race. There's just one tiny detail you might want to notice before you follow her into the shadows. One of her legs is solid copper or bronze. The other? Well, that's a donkey's hoof. But here's where this monster's story takes an absurd twist you won't expect. Tonight we're meeting the Empusa, the shape-shifting seductress whose dating profile definitely needed some honest photos. To understand how she operated, we need to step into the sandals of her victims and experience exactly how she turned a simple nighttime encounter into something far more sinister. You're walking alone on a moonlit path in ancient Greece when she appears, absolutely stunning, with eyes that seem to hold secrets and a smile that makes your heart skip. She's exactly what you need after days of trudging through dust and dodging bandits. Your brain immediately shifts into that mode where rational thought takes a backseat to hormones and loneliness. This is your lucky night, clearly. The Empusa's hunting grounds were the crossroads, those liminal spaces where Hecate's power was strongest and travelers were most vulnerable to supernatural encounters. Ancient Greeks treated crossroads like we treat dark alleys. Places where bad things happen and smart people don't linger. These weren't just road intersections. They were cosmic weak points where the underworld leaked into the mortal realm. Think of them as ancient Greece's version of a sketchy gas station at 2 a.m., except the weird guy asking for directions might actually be a servant of the goddess of witchcraft. You're tired, alone, and desperately seeking companionship after days of eating stale bread and wondering if that rustling bush contains bandits or just a really aggressive squirrel. The Empusa had a PhD in reading the room, and she knew exactly when to make her entrance. She appeared at the precise moment when your guard was down, when exhaustion had turned your brain into mush and your judgment into wishful thinking. It's the ancient equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs at 3 a.m. when they're emotionally vulnerable and likely to make poor decisions. Ancient Greek travel was basically a survival horror game where the monsters were real and the save points were few and far between. You faced bandits who viewed travelers as walking ATMs, wild animals that considered you a convenient snack, and the constant psychological strain of isolation. By the time you reached a crossroads, you were already running on fumes mentally and physically. The cover of darkness made everything worse. Your eyes played tricks, shadows moved wrong, and every sound could be your last. This is when the Empusa struck, appearing like a beacon of hope in your personal nightmare. But here's what's fascinating. Her victims weren't completely blind to the warning signs. They just couldn't bring themselves to look down. Something felt off, but they couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was the way she seemed too perfect for such a dangerous place, or how she appeared exactly when they needed her most. It's like when someone on a dating app seems too good to be true, but you're so desperate for connection that you ignore the red flags. Your subconscious is screaming warnings, but your conscious mind is too busy being flattered by the attention. Ancient Greek culture made this psychological manipulation even more effective. Hospitality was sacred. Refusing company, especially from someone who appeared vulnerable, could anger the gods. You were caught between supernatural etiquette and self-preservation, and the Empusa exploited this cultural programming perfectly. She presented herself as someone who needed protection, triggering your obligation to help, while simultaneously offering exactly what you wanted most. The mounting tension was exquisite torture. You'd notice something wasn't quite right. Maybe the way moonlight hit her features, or how her footsteps sounded wrong on the packed earth. But every time you tried to focus on these details, she'd smile or laugh, and your brain would reset to everything is fine. It's psychological warfare disguised as flirtation. The Empusa's genius wasn't just her beauty. It was her timing, appearing precisely when men were most desperate for human connection. She understood that loneliness makes people stupid, and she weaponized that knowledge with surgical precision. Even the most perfect facade has cracks, though, and those cracks become impossible to ignore once you finally work up the courage to look. So you're enchanted by this gorgeous woman, and then your eyes drift downward. And that's when the evening takes a rather unexpected turn. You notice her legs, and suddenly you're having that moment every guy dreads, realizing you've been flirting with someone who's got some very specific anatomical quirks. One leg gleams like polished bronze, catching moonlight like a medieval disco ball. The other? That's a donkey's leg. Most people would consider this a deal-breaker, but apparently ancient Greek men had very flexible standards when it came to dating. The Empusa's most distinctive feature wasn't her beauty, but what lay beneath it. One leg made of gleaming bronze, the other ending in a donkey's leg. Think of it as ancient Greece's version of catfishing, except instead of using old photos, she was using an entirely different species for half her body. The Greeks even gave her special nicknames for this charming trait, Onokol and Onoskeles, both meaning donkey leg. These weren't terms of endearment. They were basically ancient warning labels, like contents may explode, or do not operate heavy machinery. Ancient sources describe men who noticed these details and somehow convinced themselves they were seeing things wrong. Picture the mental gymnastics required to rationalize a bronze leg and donkey leg as probably just unusual footwear. Your brain performs spectacular feats of denial when your hormones are running the show. These guys were essentially gaslighting themselves in real time. The absurdity becomes even more apparent when you imagine explaining this to your friends afterward. So, how was your date? Well, she had hooves, but she was really funny. It's the kind of story that makes people question your judgment and possibly your eyesight. Depending on the text, that second limb could be donkey-shaped or even made of dung, a detail that victims somehow rationalized away. Always mismatched, always obviously inhuman, and always somehow overlooked by her victims until it was too late. This psychological phenomenon of willful blindness kicks in when you're confronted with something that contradicts your desires. Your brain essentially becomes a conspiracy theorist, creating elaborate explanations for why obviously supernatural elements are perfectly normal. Maybe the bronze leg is just really shiny armor. Maybe the donkey leg is a medical condition. Maybe you need to get your eyes checked. Anything except admitting that you're trying to hook up with a monster. The moment of recognition was inevitable, when denial becomes impossible and the beautiful woman reveals her true nature. It's that horrible instant when reality crashes through your carefully constructed delusions like a brick through a window. You finally look down, really look, and there's no explaining away what you see. The romantic evening suddenly becomes a horror movie, and you're the guy who ignored every warning sign. But the mismatched legs were just the beginning of her supernatural arsenal, a preview of the chaos she could unleash when simple deception wasn't enough. The Empusa's real talent wasn't just looking human. It was becoming anything her situation required. Just when you think you've got her figured out with the bronze leg and donkey limb, she decides to become a bull. Because apparently having mismatched legs wasn't confusing enough for her victims. She needed to add some variety to her repertoire, like a supernatural performer who got bored with her opening act and decided to throw in some improv. In Aristophanes' play, The Frogs, Xanthias' joke in lines 288 and following details these exact transformations, giving us a front-row seat to her shape-shifting mastery. She cycles through forms like a supernatural fashion show, designed by someone having a very specific kind of breakdown. First a charging bull to spark terror, then a stubborn mule, then irresistible womanhood, then a snarling dog. Each shift engineered to exploit a different fear or desire. Imagine trying to have a conversation with someone who keeps changing species mid-sentence. It's like talking to someone who can't decide on a dating app profile picture, except the stakes are significantly higher and involve potential death. The strategic brilliance becomes clear when you realize these weren't random changes, but calculated transformations. The bull form triggered primal terror. Nothing says, "run away," like a charging bovine in the middle of the night. The mule suggested stubborn persistence, the kind of creature that would follow you home whether you wanted it to or not. The beautiful woman exploited loneliness and desire, while the dog played on either comfort or fear, depending on your relationship with canines. Even Dionysus was genuinely unsettled by her constantly changing appearance, which tells you something about the psychological impact of facing a creature that refuses to maintain a consistent form. When a god of wine and revelry is having trouble processing your shape-shifting, you've achieved something special in the field of psychological warfare. Her shape-shifting served as both weapon and defense, allowing her to adapt to any situation or escape when threatened. If someone got suspicious about the bronze leg situation, she could suddenly become a bull and charge away. If they tried to corner her, she could shrink down to dog form and slip through spaces. It was the ancient equivalent of having a Swiss Army knife, except every tool was a different terrifying animal. The psychological horror of facing something that refuses to maintain a consistent form makes it impossible to predict or prepare for. Your brain keeps trying to categorize what you're seeing, but the categories keep changing faster than you can process them. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, where the pieces keep turning into different shapes while you're holding them. Her shape-shifting wasn't just magic. It was psychological warfare, designed to break down her victim's grip on reality itself. All this supernatural power served a very specific purpose, though. After all the seduction and shape-shifting, you might wonder what the Empusa actually wanted from her victims. And the answer is both simple and horrifying. She wasn't interested in romance, meaningful conversation, or even a decent meal recommendation. She wanted to eat their brains and drink their blood, which makes her the worst dinner date in recorded history. At least modern catfishers only steal your money and emotional well-being. Once she had lured her prey away from safety, the beautiful facade would drop entirely, revealing her true purpose as a consumer of human flesh and blood. Think of it as the ancient Greek equivalent of a bait-and-switch scam, except instead of signing up for a timeshare, you're signing up to become an appetizer. The moment you followed her into the darkness, you'd transitioned from potential romantic partner to tonight's special. The menu was limited, but you were definitely on it. Her preferred targets were always young men, especially travelers, those who wouldn't be missed quickly, and whose disappearance could be attributed to bandits or wild animals. She had the predatory instincts of a serial killer, combined with the customer service skills of someone who knows exactly what demographic to target. Young male travelers were basically the ancient world's equivalent of ordering pizza delivery to a sketchy neighborhood. They were convenient, they came to you, and nobody asked too many questions when they didn't make it home. The methodical nature of her hunting revealed a creature who selected victims based on vulnerability rather than random chance. She didn't just grab whoever happened to be walking by. She was a connoisseur of desperation. Tired travelers made better prey than alert ones. Lonely men were easier to manipulate than those traveling in groups. She operated like a supernatural predator with a psychology degree, understanding exactly which buttons to push to get her victims to walk willingly into her trap. Ancient Greek beliefs classified the Empusa as a vampiric creature and night spirit, placing her within a broader ecosystem of supernatural threats that haunted the darkness. She wasn't working alone. She was part of a whole supernatural food chain that included lamias, striges, and other creatures that viewed humans as a convenient midnight snack. Greece After Dark was basically a horror movie where every shadow contained something that wanted to eat you, and the Empusa was just one member of this all-star cast of nightmares. Her feeding habits reflected ancient Greek fears about the wilderness and the dangers that lurked beyond civilization's boundaries. Every crossroads became a potential crime scene, every beautiful stranger a possible death sentence. The Greeks understood that the world beyond their cities was full of things that wanted to kill them, and the Empusa represented the sophisticated end of that threat spectrum. She wasn't just a wild animal. She was a thinking, planning predator who used psychology as effectively as claws. The realization that every charming encounter at a crossroads could potentially be a death trap turned normal social interaction into a survival game. Meeting someone attractive became a calculated risk assessment disguised as flirtation. The Greeks had to develop a kind of supernatural paranoia just to navigate their own roads safely. The Empusa represented the ultimate perversion of hospitality, using the sacred duty of welcoming strangers as a hunting strategy. She weaponized one of the most fundamental aspects of Greek culture, turning kindness into a vulnerability that could get you killed. Despite all this supernatural power, though, she had some surprisingly mundane weaknesses that would make her victims wish they'd discovered them earlier. The most effective weapon against this supernatural predator turned out to be verbal abuse and loud noises. According to Philostratus's Life of Apollonius of Tyana, the great philosopher encountered an Empusa and drove her away by hurling insults at her with such ferocity that the phantom fled shrieking into the night. Not a magic sword, not a sacred ritual, not even a prayer to the gods. Just good old-fashioned trash talk delivered at maximum volume. Picture this. You're face to face with a creature that can transform into any shape, has bronze legs, drinks blood, and feasts on human flesh. Your natural instinct might be to run, pray, or at least try to negotiate. Apollonius chose option D, hurt her feelings. The philosopher and his companions basically started a roast session so brutal that a supernatural monster decided she'd rather be literally anywhere else. Imagine being so good at verbal warfare that you make a flesh-eating demon question her life choices. The absurd contrast between her terrifying supernatural abilities and her vulnerability to something as mundane as shouting insults reveals the cosmic joke at the heart of this myth. She could become a bull, a dog, or a beautiful woman at will. She could lure victims with supernatural charisma and feast on their flesh. But call her names loudly enough, and she'd basically rage quit the entire encounter. It's like discovering that Dracula's greatest weakness isn't garlic or holy water, but bad Yelp reviews delivered at high volume. This weakness reveals something fundamental about the nature of supernatural threats in Greek mythology. They often had absurdly simple solutions hidden behind their terrifying facades. The Greeks understood that sometimes the most effective defense against cosmic horror was refusing to be impressed by it. Creatures that relied on deception and illusion would naturally be vulnerable to direct confrontation. The Empusa's power came from psychological manipulation, so aggressive honesty was basically her kryptonite. The psychological logic makes sense when you consider that courage and wit were more effective than strength against supernatural threats. The Empusa thrived on fear, confusion, and desire. Direct verbal assault cut through all her carefully constructed illusions and forced her to confront the reality that her victims weren't buying what she was selling. her vulnerability reveals a larger pattern in Greek myth: monsters consistently undone by wit rather than brawn, suggesting that ancient storytellers understood something profound about the nature of fear itself. The Empusa's story remains relevant because it captures the timeless fear of being deceived by appearances and the dark humor of obvious red flags ignored. You've got a woman with a bronze leg and donkey leg hitting on you at a crossroads, and somehow this seems like a reasonable romantic opportunity. It's the ancient equivalent of matching with someone when their profile feels too curated, except the stakes involve literal flesh consumption. Ancient Greek storytellers understood that sometimes the most effective defense against supernatural threats is simply refusing to be impressed. The Empusa's vulnerability to insults reveals something profound about the nature of fear itself. When you strip away the mystique and call out the obvious problems, even the most terrifying monsters become manageable. Remember, those mismatched legs weren't just random deformities. They were Hecate's brand, marking her as a creature of the underworld, a walking red flag that somehow went unnoticed by her victims. The next time something seems too good to be true, maybe check for bronze legs and donkey limbs, just in case. Modern dating apps might not have literal monsters, but the principle remains sound. If someone's too perfect and appears at exactly the right moment, they're probably hiding something important.